Hey everyone, my name is Ben Werner. I'm the Housing Justice Program Director here at the Eastside Freedom Library. The Eastside Freedom Library is a nonprofit labor history and social movement library on the east side of St. Paul. Our mission is to inspire solidarity, advocate for justice, and work towards equity for all. A few years ago, we started doing a lot of community events about the racial housing gap in Minnesota with C.N. Thomas right there. And it led to us creating this program and beginning to host many different events and work towards housing justice in particular on the East Side. So with that, I want to invite you all to follow us on Facebook if you haven't already. We also recently got an Instagram and Twitter I think we're trying to use too. So check us out at Eastside Freedom Library. The work of the Housing Justice Program in particular, as I mentioned, is working towards housing justice on the East Side. It's also working towards housing justice in St. Paul. And as part of that, we want to host educational programming, which is what tonight's event is going to be. Housing is such a complex topic that we can really get bogged down in just what we see in front of us and what's not working. So tonight really is about imagining what the future of housing could be, and what it could be now, even if we choose to get ourselves kind of out of the box. The Eastside Freedom Library is always a place where people come to have conversations, imaginative conversations, difficult conversations, but also inspiring conversations. And so that's what I hope tonight will be like. So I'm going to start off with a video about co-housing, which is a specific type of alternative to traditional housing. We have a number of speakers that have joined us tonight. David Akos is a passionate housing advocate who has joined us tonight to talk about Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Acts. Dr. Sam Grant is the executive director of Minnesota 350 and has joined us today to discuss land trusts, but also Minnesota 350's work around environmental housing and land justice. And then Steve Tuckner and Tyrone Grandstand have joined us to discuss dreaming and doing big things through the idea of a public bank to fund housing. We are going to be recording tonight's session. We're also live on Facebook, as I mentioned. How we're going to do questions, we're going to hold off until we get through the video and the speakers. And then if more folks show up, we'll go into breakout groups, but otherwise we'll have a chance to talk with each other and ask questions of the speakers and just talk about these ideas that are in front of us. So with that, I'm going to start off with this video from Rewire about co-housing. Co-housing is a type of housing where often individual units are occupied, but then there's a lot of shared space between folks. So it's just an alternative to a lot of the individual single-family homes that we see today. So if you give me just a second, I will share this video.
I think our friends were kind of weirded out at first. I think some of our friends were, they were like, do you know what you're getting into?
My siblings repeatedly asked me if I was joining a cult, if I knew what I was doing. They asked me if I was drinking the Kool-Aid, and I said, well, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, but it's not what you think it is, you know?
But I think now that we've moved and our friends have seen what it actually is and that it's not a commune, I think that it's like, oh, like we get it now.
But when I finally bought the unit, I was really excited to have my siblings over and my little nephew, because I was like, they're gonna fall in love with this place. I mean, how could you not? And they were like, this is actually really cool. They didn't apologize for accusing me of joining a cult, but I mean, they were like, okay, we're not worried about you anymore.
Co-housing in America started when a couple architects from California visited Denmark, and they came across the concept there of people living in these kind of small villages. The term that they had for them, they sort of tried to translate, and they came up with co-housing. They brought that to America. Co-housing is a form of intentional community. Usually, everybody has their own unit, and it can be a unit, single-family house, townhouse, apartment, but everybody has their own function unit, but they also have shared common space. And with the intention that they are going to, interact socially, more so than, say, a condominium association where just everybody lives in their own units and kind of stays in their own units, and maybe they meet you know, to make decisions on, say, landscaping or what color the building should be painted. With co-housing, we're involved, we're self-managed. We intentionally get to know our neighbors and interact. So we have community meals. We have them twice a week. Other communities sometimes have more than that. But that's one of the ideas, that there are community meals, parties, gatherings, and so forth, where people regularly interact. This is my daughter, Dana. How old were you? You would have been six. You were 6 years old when we moved in here. So you had a good chunk of your life lived here at Monterey Housing.
I practically grew up here. Since my parents were separated from a young age, I had kind of two neighborhoods, but I felt like I was a little bit closer to my neighbors here. Then when I went to another house, then I had a different set of neighbors, sort of, although it was more like I was just with my mom and that family kind of in a house or an apartment. Whereas here, you know, it's kind of like family, so to speak.
I was looking for sort of an alternative living situation. I looked at rooms for rent. I remember looking at one studio apartment, and there were lots of locks on the door, and I just remember feeling like I think I would be like really socially isolated and really unhappy here, even though like it was in a relatively, you know, populated area eventually. And I don't remember the exact time, but I found Monterey Co-Housing, and it looked really intriguing, and I read everything on their website, and I thought their mission sounded really cool, and it reminded me of my time in AmeriCorps, you know, like an intentional community. When I was in AmeriCorps, we all had a common goal. You know, we were building homes, or we were, you know, serving meals, or, you know, we were working together. And while this doesn't have that same like objective, there is like people in co-housing are like committed to living together and, you know, sharing the work and sharing meals, and I don't know, committed to being a community in like a really deliberate way. And that kind of resonates with me.
While there can be a lot of conflict, I think everyone has found a way to coexist with each other, and, you know, find ways to be neighborly and take care of each other. And I think so many people here are just willing to help and jump in, and that's not something that I have found other places. I know with like, you know, even little things like, hey, we've got all this stuff to take to Goodwill. Can anybody help? You know, and a couple people like jump in and say, hey, I'll help tomorrow, no problem. And even recently, our daughter, her open house night got moved for school, and all of our like babysitters weren't like canceled, and we were sort of in a pickle. And one of our neighbors actually ended up watching Avadia, and it was really like no problem, we can watch her. So, and like I came home and they were playing with like Connects on the floor, and you know, so it's nice. It feels like everybody sort of has each other's backs, and I think too many hands make light work. So, you know, having people around who are willing and happy to help and, you know, take that benefit away of that ownership of the community is really awesome.
I think it's because there was a feeling of alienation from neighbors, that people could live in suburban and urban enclaves where they would drive into their garage, close the garage door, live their lives, drive out, and they would never get to know the neighbors. And a lot of people who lived here said that they had lived for years, 10, 20 years in a neighborhood, and they didn't know the person 2 doors down. So I think people miss that. People, I think, miss the feeling of living in something like a village, you know, which is, I think, what we're trying to replicate here is something like a village.
All right. So that was co-housing. So at this point, I'm going to invite David to speak, and then we'll do Sam, and then Steve and Tyrone will take over.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that video and intro, Ben. I love the idea of co-housing and cooperative housing more in general, which, can have varied degrees of shared space, like with co-housing. But that's part of what got me interested in Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, actually, which is what I want to talk about today. It also was the project of the Skies Without Limits collective in Minneapolis and their victory with the Steve Friends Corcoran 5 housing units, where they were able to successfully purchase them from the owner and turn them into a cooperative housing with the help of some land bank financing. So that sort of got people discussing tenant opportunity to purchase. It's now a potential possibly going to be adopted in Minneapolis. We'll see about this next election who we have in the city council. But in short, TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, TOPA, is a law that supports tenants to buy a property or leverage their stake in a property when that property is going to be sold. It creates a legal right for tenants to make a competing offer when their landlord decides to sell, and their landlord is required to give them notice and a certain amount of time that either they've found a buyer and are going to sell, or they're putting it on the market, and it slows down the sale process to give tenants time to secure financing, form a tenant organization or LLC, and compete with cash-rich investors. And its title kind of describes the basic core of the law, because the tenants always would get the opportunity to purchase, even if or would always get the chance to purchase a property when their owner is going to sell. And it's a preservation tool for long-term affordability, even if renters choose not to own as a cooperative or as a condo, because in some forms of the law, they can assign their rights to a third-party developer or a nonprofit developer, which is called a qualified party. And this that can allow those units to maintain levels of deep affordability, depending on sort of the type of law that the city adopts, even if tenants decide to move on. TOPA can go hand in hand with rent stabilization and requiring no source of income discrimination. And in my opinion, a good TOPA policy would also have funding for technical assistance and give tenants access to land banks, city affordable housing funds, and technical support in creating permanently affordable housing cooperatives. The right to assign the first purchase of their building over to an affordable housing nonprofit to keep it permanently affordable also, is a good sort of way to keep TOPA feasible, even if a lot of tenants don't have the opportunity to, or don't have an easy way to get funding. But so kind of theory behind this is, and part of why I find it really, really moving is, renters live vibrantly and create art and beautify their neighborhoods just like homeowners. And with prices skyrocketing, I think all the residents are part of making our city valuable and desirable. But renters get pushed out as prices go up because the current system doesn't give them any stake in their neighborhood. And TOPA would sort of allow us to shift the market away from real estate speculators a little bit, where, right now developers are making hundreds of millions off our cities, and the city subsidizes new development really heavily, which means the value we create as residents gets siphoned off in tax dollars and then given to developers to create new housing. And, recently upwards of 50% of Twin Cities rental sales have been going to out-of-state developers. But TOPA would force owners to give us a say in how our buildings are sold, and local landlords, when they choose to retire and sell, would have the opportunity and hopefully a good technical framework to let tenants have an opportunity to take that housing off the market and make it a permanently affordable apartment for the community that's already living there. So, sort of in short, with renters already struggling and developers making money off our city, we're forced to move. A TOPA law where the city supports tenants and qualified buyers to own could take apartment buildings, rental houses, and undeveloped land off the speculative real estate market and make it democratically owned and shared by the people who live on it. So I'm really excited to talk more about what TOPAs look like in other places and talk about the potential for anti-displacement, pro-renter protections, and democratic shared use policies like TOPA in questions afterwards. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, David. Sam, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, David, and thanks for showing the video at the beginning. So something that Ken said in the video about the Monterey co-housing, he talked about alienation. And so this sort of picks up on what David is talking about with the TOPA. We have a world ecology based on racialized capitalism, and it alienates all of us from relationship to each other and from the freedom to self-determine through free association how we want to make life work collectively. And what I love about the co-housing model is it invites people to a format that structures them back into a self-determining relationship. What Dave talks about with TOPA is an opportunity, and if we made it formalized in law, that before a slumlord can just sell off something for a profit and run to the next profit margin, the tenants have the right to cut speculation on that particular property.
And is
So
doing an event, and I just
So it's a case-by-case opportunity to shift us out of a market based on speculation to a different kind of market that is centered in the values we hold with each other as human beings. The land trust is another way to do that. So I'm going to tell a couple of stories, but I'm going to go back in time to a failed attempt to start a land trust, which helps you understand the context of we have to sort of shift our worldview as human beings. And that's one of the key points of transformative organizing in this decade, is to help human beings understand that until we transform our way of thinking about who we are in relationship to each other in the earth, we'll continue to fight with each other in zero-sum dynamics to get a piece of the pie. So in 1988, I was part of a development effort in the central neighborhood in South Minneapolis. We were looking for an opportunity to do a comprehensive block treatment. All the houses on a particular block. The Keystone Rangers were using this block to sell crack cocaine. It was a totally devastated block. So I came in as a property manager, and my job was to get the Keystone Rangers out, get the buildings all boarded up. And then once I had the buildings boarded up and they were secure and there's nobody getting in at night, then to bring the neighbors into dialogue about the future of that block. The neighbors graciously gave me 6 whole months to dialogue with them about why they should start a land trust, because I was excited about the model. The neighbors at the end of the 6-month process said, Sam, we appreciate how hard you've worked to convince us. We think maybe in other contexts you're a good salesman, but you failed in this case, brother. We want the same thing the Joneses have. If other people own the full bundle of rights as homeowners, we want that full bundle of rights. And we believe it's worth the risk of potentially losing our houses in foreclosure to go after that full bundle of rights and to have a mortgage completely in our own name. Here's the rub. The 2008 financial crisis hit, and some of the properties on that block went into foreclosure, including the one of the family that fought hardest to convince the rest of the neighbors to reject the land trust model. The whole point of land trust, which builds on what David said, is to cut speculation out of the housing market, and it does this by collective ownership of the land. So if the community owns the land under its dreaming, nobody can come and pull the rug out from underneath that community. What Mindy Fuller, the great psychiatrist at Columbia University, talks about is root shock. You cut out the power of capitalism to give root shock to a particular group when they've organized in that kind of a formation. Now, land is still expensive, housing is still expensive, but in studies done by the land trust movement post the 2008 financial crisis, they found that the likelihood of any homeowner having their property go into foreclosure was radically lower in a land trust situation. So in a land trust, the community collectively owns the land. And let's say the average market value of a house in St. Paul right now is just under $230,000. The land trust would own whatever we collectively determine the value of that land is, and that might be about 1/3 of that property value. So if you get a property for 228,000, about 75,000 of that land is held in trust by the land trust, which means the owner only has to take out a loan for that house on about $160,000 or $155,000. A lot more families can afford to get into a house at 155 than can get in at 230 or 300, which is the average median in Minneapolis, or even above 300. So it gives more people a chance to get in, and it sets up a situation in which very few people are ever likely to be forced out. So this notion of alienation as something that we need to remedy with our organizing, and speculation as something we need to remedy with our organizing, are two critical things to understand that we need to continue to have a critique of. In a lot of my organizing, folks talk a lot about gentrification, and they want to think about how can we make our community a better place to live without displacing the people who live here now. So the co-housing model, what David is talking about with TOPA and land trusts, instead of a community trying to pick, well, which one of those should we try? I actually think communities need to go after the whole set and figure out how to organize on a collective basis and get everybody in the community to pick the approach that works best for them. Because we're complex, we're different from each other. So a couple of quick stories. In 2009, I became the executive director of a land trust on the seashore in California. We built the first certified passive house, new construction in the state of California. California is insanely expensive, but we moved a low-income family into that first certified passive house in the state. And the way we did it is by selling how cool it was for a lot of the laborers and the construction workers and the contractors to be the first at the table. So nobody knew what a passive house was. Everybody wanted to figure it out. So we got a whole lot of labor at no cost. We got a whole lot of materials at no cost. And that allows us to build a house in California with a rent of just $800 a month. That's insane. That doesn't happen in California, but we did it. And actually it's under 800, it's about $780 a month. So the final story, right now in my organizing at MN350, we are recognizing that we have an opportunity to think about climate change by working on land justice. I came up with an organizing frame to organize with BIPOC farmers to say, if you're willing to sequester carbon and document how you're doing it, bring back biodiversity and document how you're doing it, contribute only to local living economies and not join with industrial extractive agriculture, and then organize with the other BIPOC farmers that are in our formation to displace the space in which industrial agriculture can operate, then we're going to help you get lifelong access to land through a number of models. One could be collective ownership. So we've organized the Minnesota Agrarian Commons. The Minnesota Agrarian Commons buys the land, and the people who are working on the land would own whatever they build on the land. They'd own that asset like in a land trust model. But Minnesota has a corporate farm law, which only allows you to have the land for 21 years. You have to renew your lease every 21 years. So because of this impediment to stability of ownership and the right to pass on full ownership, some of the people we've been organizing with have said, well, I need a different model than that. So we've gone beyond creating the Minnesota Agrarian Commons to now we're looking at also creating the Midwest Farmers of Color Land Trust, which will serve an 8-state region and organize BIPOC farmers collectively with those same 4 organizing objectives, but providing a different way for them to have a stake of permanent ownership in the property. So there's a complexity in the way we have been trained to think about the issue of ownership. I come from more of an anarchist bias. I think property is theft. I think that we should give up on property and focus on relationship and sharing the bounties of life and not needing to separate ourselves from each other in that. But that's a marginal perspective here in the United States of America. I also, in alignment with the co-housing work, did work with my brother to create an eco-village in West Africa, in Sierra Leone. And there, people still live by a cooperative cosmology. So we went and one day talked about his dream of creating an early childhood preschool in that village. At the end of one day, we had 110 people who lived in that village of 3,000 form 9 worker cooperatives that did all of the work to grow the food, build the school, cook for the children, provide the maintenance, build the furniture, put up the solar array, manage the water harvesting system. So all of that happened in one day because this was a community that recognized what Paul Wellstone said, which we didn't really get here in Minnesota because he was just too cool for the state. He said, we all do better when we all do better. And what we're talking with you all about this evening is all about that exact ethos. We all do better when we all do better. Co-housing, TOPA, and land trust are all vehicles for that.
Thank you, Sam. I'll pass it over to Steve and Tyrone now.
Okay, I'm going to do the intro here for Tyrone, who's going to be doing the presentation. Thanks for inviting Tyrone and myself to this event. With our presentation, we want to shatter the myth that we need to beg private developers to please build us some affordable housing so that some of us aren't living in tents in the middle of a Minnesota winter. We as a public can build the housing we need. We can make sure that everyone who needs housing gets good quality, deeply affordable, net zero green housing. The presentation will be done by Tyrone Grandstrand, and I'm going to let Tyrone take it away.
Thanks. I need permission to share my screen if that's okay.
Give it a shot now.
Okay.
Awesome.
So my name is Tyrone Grandstrand. I give you a little, and also thanks for the introduction, Steve. My background, I started as an elected official when I was 24 years old in Grand Forks, North Dakota. While I was there, I helped start the first community land trust in the state. Sam forgot to mention that the people who invented land trusts were Black farmers in Georgia. And the first housing land trust was started in Burlington, Vermont, while Bernie Sanders was mayor. So it's a really cool model, and it was fun to hear about all the stories that you were involved in, Sam. And so after I got done there, I did one term and realized I needed to learn more. So I went to New York City and studied a master's degree in policy, focused on housing. And so I learned a lot there. And then I came back and worked in a planning department in Fargo, North Dakota, and I helped start the third community land trust in the state. And then I came here to the Twin Cities to work for a nonprofit that does housing work. And now I'm here with you today to talk about public banking and public housing, how we could use these things together. So the first thing that's important to talk about is what's the need. Just in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Bloomington, not the whole metro, we need 100,000 units of housing that's affordable to people of various income levels. The lowest income, it's about 2/3, 72,000, about 1/3 at the slightly higher low income range at 35,000 units, and then just a smidge for people that are a little bit higher income still. It's a lot of housing. It's a really big gap, especially considering how many people live in these three cities. Just to give you a sense of what's happening right now with the market, you know, a lot of people talk about let the market solve the problems, they'll eventually get there. In 2017, which is the most recent data I could get, the three cities had 7,500 units under construction, and that includes everything. 5,600 of that was rental, and very little of that was affordable. So even if this was 100% affordable, which it wasn't, it would take over 13 years to meet the need that exists today. And if we just factor in even a small amount of growth in need or population, it basically extends that indefinitely. So we're looking at a problem that's never going to be solved. And this includes some of the time where local politicians have talked about really big investments in affordable housing, some that are running for re-election in Minneapolis now. Financially, though, what's possible? It doesn't take 100 years to solve this problem, and not 10. In fact, if we wanted, we could do it in a single year financially. There are some other things that would slow it down a little bit from that, which we'll talk about in a second. So first, let's talk about the simplest possible model. What if we just built the housing, no subsidies, we just borrowed money through our cities? For this, we'll assume that we'll set rents at the cost of actually building the housing plus a modest margin of safety, which just means we charge a little bit more rent than the actual cost so that we always know we have enough to pay the bills. These costs are set by looking at Minnesota Housing's estimates for total development costs, which includes everything that's involved in building a housing development or unit. Interest on that initial cost is based on the low interest rate options that municipalities have. They're called tax exempt bonds. And the length of that debt or the mortgage is 50 years to spread it out over multiple generations. I think this is a good idea because if we build high quality housing that's going to last for 100 or 200 or longer years, then we want to spread that cost out as much as we can. And 50 is the longest that could be reasonably done. So then we add in some extra costs to build solar panels and extra insulation. We want to do essentially a passive house standard. So we get to the numbers. For each unit, each 2-bedroom unit, the mortgage amount would be about $223,000. The monthly payments on that mortgage are about $720. And the management upkeep we estimate to be about $300. And so you add in that margin of safety and you get to $1,125. Now compare this to the units in the metro that have a massive subsidy and they're charging $1,400. So why am I showing you this? Just to show that even without a subsidy, if we really committed to public purpose, we could do it better without a subsidy than we're seeing developers, private developers do today in the metro. So now if we add in, there's 2 different versions of the low income housing tax credit, which is a common subsidy that's used by for-profit and nonprofit private affordable housing developers. If we use the lower value of the 2 versions of it, and the one that's infinite, which is why we're using it, we can actually lower the cost significantly just with that. So in this case, the mortgage amount goes down, not because it's cheaper to build, but because the tax credit covers some of the costs. So now we're at $112,000. The monthly payment for the mortgage part is $405. Management and upkeep, a little less than $300. And you can see in the chart how much the rents would have to be. And here we're assuming that 2/3 of the housing we build is going to be for those very low income folks because those are the houses, that's where the housing need is, and 1/3 for the slightly higher income people. And so these rents look way better than that did, and probably a lot better than the rents you see in your neighborhoods now. I'll give you a second to look. So now what we want to do is, what if we added a public bank on top of that, which could do so much. A public bank could help finance community land trusts and co-housing units, and could help finance TOPA, including the technical assistance that would be necessary, but also it could help with public housing and lower the rents even further. So now using our own public bank to sort of push down those sort of monthly mortgage costs, we could drop that by almost $100, and the result is rents that are even lower. We went from a studio that was about $500 to one that's about $420 for the lowest income folks. And for the higher income folks, it was over $900 and now it's under $900. So the point here is to think about what's possible. What we just talked about, it doesn't require a budgetary expenditure. We don't have to put $50 million in a housing trust. We don't have to spend any budgetary amounts. We just have to decide to do the development and focus it on public purpose. This can be repeated infinitely from a financial perspective. The actual limits then become how many trained workers do we have, which can be an opportunity. If we're training more workers and we're getting them great jobs and paying them union wages to build great housing for all the people who live in St. Paul and Minneapolis and beyond, that's a good thing. That's an economic development potential. There's also the issues with materials, so we have to figure out how we're going to source those and get enough to build as many units as possible. But the point is the limits that exist in reality are much higher than what most people imagine today. We just have to take it out of the market and think about providing something publicly. Political will becomes one of the barriers here. Private markets require profits, and those profits have to be higher than any other possible opportunity. So any sort of stock investment or bond investment or housing somewhere else, it has to be higher here than other places for people to want to invest significantly. And so we're sort of undercutting that. And so somebody's going to get mad if we do this. and they're going to talk to the elected officials about it. And the elected officials have to be able to withstand that pressure. But the private markets functioning in the way they do, it's incompatible with ending homelessness. And it's incompatible with making housing truly affordable for everyone. We'll never get there if we follow that model. This is one of the reasons why we make things like utilities, like water and electricity and other either public or highly regulated, to ensure that people don't die from dehydration or freeze in the winter. Obviously, in the US, we're not 100% on that, but we do pretty good generally. And it's because they're run publicly. And if we didn't do that, it would look just like the housing market. We'd have a lot of the same problems we do. So we need to switch the way we think about it. So imagine a world where we solve problems. Imagine living in a walkable, livable, lovable neighborhood that we designed together, instead of having it be developer-driven housing focused on profit and gentrification. Imagine an end to homelessness and housing cost burden. Imagine an end to neighbors living in subpar housing. And just one final point, one of the side benefits, and there are many, but just one that people can really understand. If we put solar on all these and we actually met the need, we'd be generating 228 gigawatt hours per year of energy. That's enough to power 20,800 homes, and not the efficient ones that we're building. Those, we'd be able to power even more of those units. So there's all these amazing side benefits as well, if we just decide that this is a problem we actually want to solve. And remember, I said there's no budgetary cost to this. We could just do it with the tools we have available. Yeah, thank you.
Tyrone, could you talk about just for a moment what a public bank would look like?
Sure. I mean, so essentially right now, what cities do is they put money into a bank account now, and they just stash it away. And what they're doing is they're showing creditors that they're a good credit risk because they have a certain percentage of their total annual budget in the bank account. So what a public bank would do in its simplest form would just be to shift that money from US Bank or JP Morgan or whatever bank they're working with into their public bank. And then it would be able to use that to do the same things all these banks do, except it would treat the city itself and anyone else it's served like the wealthiest customers that these corporate banks have, giving them lower interest rates, better terms, understanding the local situation better. They could focus money on, helping everybody in the whole metro get solar panels on the roofs, get more insulation. They could focus on things that would reduce racial disparities in wealth and income. They can really focus on what matters here and think about it from a public purpose perspective rather than a purely profit perspective. So they won't be investing in oil pipelines that go through native lands in North Dakota, for example.
Thanks, Tyrone.
I'm not sure what a link deposit is. We could talk after.
Yeah, so let's just open up to questions now. I think that we're small enough that we don't need to do breakout groups unless you'd like to. Would you like to do breakout groups, or should we just stay as a larger group?
We can stay in the collective.
All right.
I'm sorry. One of the things I just want to expand on the public bank really quick is that if we just think of St. Paul, a very simple public bank, and this is like the simplest possible thing, is just that the city takes 300 million, puts it in the bank, and the bank is set up. Okay. You can do so much more with the public bank. You could have, citizens of St. Paul depositing money in a public bank. But the very simplest and the most easy to set up would just be to have St. Paul put their reserves in there and boom, hire a few staff and you have a public bank. So I just want to bring that up.
Do you have to have a charter? Do you have to apply for a charter like private banks do?
Yeah, it would be the same as a private bank, and you could buy a charter too, either buy or apply for a new one.
I have two other questions. One is, what village in Sierra Leone, Sam, did you do that project in?
It was in Mondema.
Mandama?
Yeah, in the Kenema district, the far east of the country.
Okay. And thank you. That's very intriguing. And then my other question is about the Tyrone building the houses. What about the outrageously increasing costs of inputs such as lumber and nails? I mean, right now, the costs of inputs to build are far outstripping, what we could actually build a house for and sell it on the market and keep it affordable. So I'm curious to know how we would mitigate that.
Well, one of the benefits of using the tax credit program is that covers a big chunk of the cost, no matter how high they are. The other thing to think about is probably the high prices now don't stick around forever. There was a lot of shutdowns in supply that created a shortage because of COVID that will over time be ameliorated because people start producing again. But then the other thing to think about is materials are only part of the cost. You got to pay workers. Developers take huge amounts of profit. And so there's other costs that make up a big chunk too. So all the costs wouldn't go up a lot, but maybe the rents are $25 or $50 higher. It wouldn't break the model to have higher input costs.
I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I have a situation, and it is a multi-year, multi-phase development with solar and modular, and we don't know if we're going to be able to pull the project off. And the biggest impetus right now is wages, having a wage agreement, a wage and labor agreement. Because of the buckets of money that we use that go into land acquisition and development, we have to demonstrate that we're using small, female, minority-owned contractors, and they typically don't participate in a wage and labor agreement. And we haven't historically been held to that, but now with a new city attorney and a new interpretation, we are held to that. So does anyone have any feeling? On one part of me says, yes, the skilled labor should be paid well. And then the other part of me is like, there's this big gap between what we have to do and the reality out in the streets. We can't find smaller contractors that are paying subs a labor and wage agreement, and our project isn't big enough for a Ryan or a large corporate developer to come in. Any thoughts on the tensions between building affordable projects and operating under a wage and labor agreement?
I'm a IBW union member, and if you're looking for labor and stuff like that, you can always call the hall and talk about the project you're doing, and maybe they could refer you to a person to a contractor that could fit your needs. So that might be an outlet.
And one strategy, to pick up on what Stephen shared, is a good friend of mine that I'm doing some work with, who is right now leading the Rondo Reconnect project, Keith Baker, led a project to challenge the people building the Viking Stadium to significantly upgrade the way they engaged minority contractors. And their appetite was somewhere between the range of 3 and 7%. And when he said you have to go for 30% minority contractors, they said, well, there's not that many minorities with the skills to do construction trades in the state of Minnesota. And he laughed them off, and he organized, and 26% of the labor for that deal went to minority contractors. So Keith Baker, if you just Google Reconnect Rondo, you'll find his contact info. He might be a good resource for you, because I think part of his organizing strategy was to bundle the small scale cats into a bigger scale collective. And then that bigger scale collective was able to contract at a higher scale, take on more risk, but also bring more financing to the table. So I think Keith might be a heavy hitter that's the perfect fit for what you're trying to do.
Thank you.
I was wondering, in the new homes, would you consider doing like or have you considered doing like geothermal for heating and stuff? Because that might be able to, lower the amount of electricity, and then obviously wouldn't really have to use much natural gas, if any, depending upon how well the system works and stuff. But that could be a possibility too.
For us, that's what we imagined doing, was either doing geothermal or air source heat pumps, all electric, just to cut down on greenhouse gas and keep things cheap in the long-term future.
Very cool. We have a question from Junelle.
I just gonna say is I'm in Minneapolis, and I have a group in St. Paul, so that's why I'm on here, and I have a group in Minneapolis. But I am also part of the tiny houses project that's in St. Paul, that's in Minneapolis, that changed the laws in Minneapolis. And I know the problem that we having is that people was like, don't build in my back, don't build here in my backyard. We don't want you here. And it's most of the commissioners are mostly pushing it away. The people that's in the neighborhood wants it, and the commissioner is like, it's like 10-1. And then, and I don't know how commissioners get so much power to say, no, we can't go here.
I was kind of curious, do you guys, do you only do like areas where you got fresh land and then you can start building everything fresh? Or do you try to maybe even just like, here's a city block and there's individual homes? Do you just demo all the homes and then start fresh? Or do you just try to reuse those existing homes, maybe make them energy efficient? Or
No,
have you done anything like that?
no, what happened is, okay, we got the plan. Okay, when stuff started getting rough, we had got all the homeless people. We got answers from all the homeless people, what they want and how they want their houses to be and what they want to live in. We got all that questionnaires done, and then it's 5 of us is the leaders that speak out for the people that's homeless, because we've been homeless, or we formerly homeless, and one of us still is homeless, and we got all the money, and we raised the money, we raised everything. It's just that this will be our first project, and it's like we was trying to put it in District 4, and they wanted to build Bowyer Square there, and said we wouldn't be right there. It wouldn't look right. And it's like, okay. And it's like every time you go and take it somewhere where the people, like what people want, you never can get it. The commissioners got to say so.
Who's the commissioner for District 4, Janelle?
Oh my, I forgot what his name is. I forgot what his name.
All right. So one thing I want to suggest, and I'm just, shooting from the hip here out of love and respect for the organizing you're doing. So thank you for that hard work. And I understand and appreciate the blowback that you got from a county commissioner who, I'm not sure what their particular, proposition was, but counties and cities tend to want to figure out how to do what makes them the most money, gives them the most clout, and brings in the most tax revenue to the city or the county. And so a tiny homes, kind of strategy, they might believe that's unaesthetic. They might believe if you're housing a whole lot of homeless people, that you're going to have an increased police presence there. And so they're thinking that's going to be a drain on property value. So there's a negative way they think about this. And I think Tyrone and Steve were going to sort of bring us into this dreamscape. And I think we need to get back to that, because I think part of what has to be done here is to challenge the imagination. And so I think all of the people who are speaking tonight are talking about challenging the imagination. But Janelle, I know a couple of really brilliant architects who might be willing to come and meet with your group. And what can happen is that the architects actually show, A, how it's aesthetically appealing, B, lay out more of the ways in which all of the aspects of the design of the tiny home strategy actually solves a lot of the critical challenges that are costing the county a lot of money. You could save shitloads of money in District 4 by organizing housing for homeless people. And I think there's an argument to be made there that can be built if you get a couple of economic justice organizers and architects working with you on your case. So if you'll put your contact info in the chat or just shout it out and I'll write it down, I'll get back in touch with you and connect you to some folks who might be able to give you some pro bono support to build that next level of the story so that your necessary organizing will win.
I think John is next in the stack.
Yeah, and also, Janelle, is that Philippe Cunningham in Ward 4? That does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the city council ward.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Philippe's usually progressive on a lot of the other issues. But that, I mean, this really kind of gets at my question. So my, white middle class prejudice assumption is that co-housing is something that hippies did, and it's kind of a white middle class thing, kind of like tiny homes. I work as a housing organizer for MICA, so I'm aware that that's not the reality, but it is also the case that is kind of a common thing. Skies Without Limits and tiny homes for poor people are both kind of ways. Those are the. So I'm really interested to know. I from what I've seen, the Skies Without Limit group is largely Spanish speaking. Probably a number of new Americans in it. And tiny homes is very often aimed at low income. Sorry, the Envision and the settled tiny home projects are definitely aimed at low income housing. But also there's the yuppie Marie Kondo, minimize your shit, tiny homes kind of thing. And so I just kind of, as an organizer and thinking about organizing ideas, how do we, break into awesome, ways to talk about co-housing that have the racial justice at the core. It's kind of a diffuse question, but it's just there's these class and race things that are overlaid on all of them. And so I know David mentioned Skies Without Limits. If you know anything more about how that happened, I'd be interested to hear that. And I know Samuel from years of your work, so you got racial justice stuff in your stuff too. So that's my question.
Want to go first, David?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I want to throw in a couple things, I guess. First of all, for me, I think, giving more rights and assigning more rights to the current residents of these neighborhoods is a really key step for racial justice. And I want to make a quick plug for rent stabilization in St. Paul, which is we're working really hard to get 10,000 signatures now. And if we do, that'll be one part of a key, like land trusts, like TOPA, to start shifting the power away from the private developers and towards the current residents. But as far as Skies Without Limits, so that was kind of a unique and really cool case where the owner of these buildings was really a slumlord. He had his license revoked from the city of Minneapolis to rent. So the tenants who were being organized with the help of Includidos Unidos started putting their rent funds into a escrow account to start repairing the building, plan towards hopefully buying the building. And I think they had once they started envisioning it and thinking about it, they had the realization, well, we get a lot of support from this local community we want to make this permanent. And luckily the Land Bank Twin Cities was able to come in and help provide the financing. And I think, collectively with that organizing, really like Steve Tuckner and Tyrone was talking about, like, we can collectively fund all of this. And, and that doesn't need to be small houses. It doesn't need to be, co-housing is one approach to cooperative ownership, but, Skies Without Limits and a lot of, there are also the Riverton cooperatives are, cooperatively owned and operated without necessarily the big focus on shared space so much as just taking that, taking the landlord, taking the private equity out of the picture and saying, we want to own our own housing. We can finance this collectively as a city and we can make it happen. So I'm going to toss it over to Sam now.
But before tossing it to me, I want to actually kick this question to Tyrone and have you talk about how the public bank is like a really great and necessary answer to the question that John is raising. So Tyrone, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think I missed part of the question, to be honest. But the thing about a public bank is you can use all the power of a bank to create really low cost financing for any project, and it can be of any length. If you're a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Iowa, which is where a big place where banks get their funding from that are in this area in Des Moines, Iowa, and you can look it up, Federal Home Loan Bank, FHLB, Des Moines, and they'll loan banks money out at 1.8% for 30 years. And so the difference between, getting a 6, 7, 8% interest loan for 20 years and being able to get 1.8 for 30 or more, it makes such a big difference. It's hard to understand unless you are a spreadsheet nerd and you put it all down, but it just makes a huge difference in what's possible. Something that all the experts might say, this just usually doesn't pencil out or doesn't work. When you have access to capital like that at such low rates, almost anything is possible. There aren't limits in the same way.
Thank you, Tyrone. So I just want to honor what Tyrone said and just get people to breathe that in for a second. When we think about a city, whose money is it? Whose money is it? I'll ask it one more time. Whose money is
Our
it?
money.
Our money.
And if it's our money,
money.
then we have a say in it, right? If it's our money, we have a say in it. But we have been hoodwinked to believe it's not our money. We have been hoodwinked to believe that centralized power, domination, and control in exchange for a little peanut, it's good enough for me, right? So that's living on the plantation kind of thinking. We need to democratize capital. A public bank is a tool for doing that. And it's an important tool for people in St. Paul to say, we're not waiting anymore. It's our money, and we're going to use it in a way that takes care of everybody in St. Paul. We can do this. So to get at a piece of John's question, I want to appreciate that Junelle and his team started with, or their team started with organizing the most impacted folks, the homeless folks. That is the right first and constant maneuver, is to stay in that dialogue. An extra part of that is to link that dialogue to people who are willing to sit shoulder to shoulder and practice that active solidarity, who have critical skills they bring to the table. So by virtue of having those people in the room with you, when you talk to Philippe Cunningham, they're people who he looks up to and respects, and they're people who, if they say this is what makes sense, that's going to challenge what he's hearing from other people who are saying, oh, Philippe, you can't do that because it's going to be honest, it's not going to be appealing, and you're not going to win the next time you run. So you have to flood him with perspective from people who he already listens to, and that's another part of the organizing. So John, part of what hurts me in my Black body here in the Twin Cities is the deep structural violence that's racialized. So we are made to experience every day, no matter how many degrees we have, that our voices don't count as much. that our credit doesn't matter. If we have the same credit as Tyrone, we have the same credit as David, we have the same credit as Jean who's waiting, or Jan who's waiting to ask a question, it doesn't matter. Because we have something that's blocking us in terms of the way people evaluate quote unquote human beings. Not all of us get human status still in 2021. So I think part of the necessary organizing is to organize on a cultural basis, and then organize on an intercultural basis and a class basis. So first you organize within a cultural community, then you organize across cultural communities that share a class status, and then you organize to link and braid those statuses together based on a common value stream. And I think that values alignment work is the critical organizing of the next 10 years. We need a revolution in values if we're going to change the state of housing in Minnesota. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'm going to pass off to Jan now.
Okay. You're on mute, Jan.
Yeah, you're muted.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting going on, and it fits into the conversation about tiny houses but smaller spaces and how they go together. You know, we've separated housing and work, which is a mistake, I think. We've made houses bigger than they need to be for a lot of people. They don't necessarily fit for different stages of life. So I think part of affordable housing is having options that fit different groups of people. One is I posted 2 links. I don't know if they'll come up for links, but if you take those headlines, you'll get to the articles. One is a story about small houses that they did in Texas. Now it's Texas, so it's warmer there, but they made, for homeless people, they made these houses, and then they have community space. So it's kind of a mix of cooperative, where there's, there's different kinds of supports. There's a clinic there, or I mean, medical help there. And it's a really, really interesting article. And some of the cost of housing was like, to build was like $20,000. And what they found out was that a lot of the people that are homeless are single with no families, and part of gathering together is, the tent villages and stuff, is trying to have some community, so anyway, it's a very interesting article, and I think I think it captures what is missing in our housing period. I've lived in the city, I've lived in suburbs, I understand a variety of different ways of living, housing options, and I think we need to look at it differently, and it's just becomes too housing only. Another thing that I posted is about bungalow courts. It's another style of housing, which is kind of old fashioned, but what they do, instead of, like, most townhouses have, like you say, you go into a garage or a row house, you never see the neighbors, you don't connect. Is a bungalow court is they have a shared inner space, so it can be a playground for kids. For older people, it can be picnic tables, or it depends upon what the need is. But the houses themselves are just small, they're small, but just what people need, not overly done. So I guess I feel like the kind of the tiny house movement started because people needed affordable housing, but it opened up thinking, and then manufactured homes open up thinking. I mean, and you can stack things. Another model is there comes out of Asia is shop houses. And it's the idea of you have like a garage space at street level, and when there's a group of them together, and you can make a little kind of shopping street, if you will, but it's a place to work, and then you have a simple place above. And you can even stack other things, so 4 stories or whatever, but it's affordable spaces, um, not trying to, I mean, so many times what a lot of people want is a place to sleep and just, have their little kitchenette or something like that. It's not like they need all the space. I think small is really nice. So I guess I'd say, I've had an idea years ago, and it's a variation on the cooperative. It's just like you build, like a garage style, the size studio. And then, I was going to do it with my sister, and then we were going to have an art studio or a shared space and stuff. But the idea was you have enough land so that you can add other people, just you can kind of build it out and make a little village. Another, I mean, there's so I think configuration is really an important issue. And the only other thing I wanted to comment about is years ago, my son lived in the Rossmore building in St. Paul, which was when it was still illegal, and it was, but he was an artist, videographer and stuff. And I would go there, and it just was so much fun because the people weren't going away to work, they were there. So you had the idea of like being in an office where you have a sense of community. At the same time, you got a nice place, your own little nest to sleep and work in and all that. So they would socialize together, they would cooperate, they'd work on projects together, they'd hire each other. So I guess that kind of an idea I think is really important too. So one of my core things is when you keep separating housing from the rest of your life, it's lonelier. It just is, so that's my comments.
Thanks, Jan. That just totally reminded me, I'm reading this book right now called 101 Walkable City Rules. And it talked a little bit about how somehow we bought into this notion that there was an idea in urban planning in the 1950s that was, let's separate every aspect of your life to make your life more efficient. And that was the lie that we all bought into for the next 50 years. And that's why everything is so separated. But you look at a lot of cities on the East Coast or in Europe, and there is not so much clear separation. So I'm glad we're kind of moving back towards thinking like that. Stephen, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I really like this idea. I think it's a really great idea. I was wondering, do you guys have different ways of implementing I mean, you obviously have had the idea like you're going to build a brand new home that's super efficient, solar panels, have common areas and stuff, and obviously private dormitories and all that. But have you guys considered like, all right, here's a city block, maybe take out all the fences in the middle, build some common area there, and then the existing structures, if they need to be torn down, maybe tear them down, or, you know, or just make them energy efficient, reuse the same structure, you know, and maybe even install like the geothermal for that block, and then it feeds every house in that block, and type of thing. And then I was also kind of curious too, like, let's say that you get a group of people that want to live in the community, and you guys get the loan, you have everything done, and it gets paid off and everything. Like, and then let's just say somebody passes away. When somebody else comes back in, I assume, you know, the real obligations after it's paid off is that you got probably city taxes, property taxes, and then whatever, and utilities, and then maintenance, right? And like, would the idea just be like, okay, we need a new person to come in, and then I don't know how do you vet for that? I don't know what you do. I mean, because I mean, I'd want it to be open and inclusive to everybody, you know what I mean? So I don't know how that goes about. Not that I would be like, oh, I don't want you to be here or anything, you know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm just kind of curious, you know, how all that would work, or how has it worked? If you guys have done it before, how has that worked? So, okay, that's kind of my question. Great idea though, I love it.
Who do you want to direct that question to, Stephen? Might be easier if you point it somewhere.
Anybody that feels like they could has an answer to it. If you want to answer, Sam, you can, or any one of you guys that have been in the project. So
I think I can answer a part of it. You know, I should clarify, you know, this is my first time meeting, you know, Sam and Steve, and I'm really excited. I think we're all, and Tyrone, I think we're all working towards the same things. And I'm really, you know, overall for me, I don't think we have specific types of housing envisioned. You know, I have a few ideas myself, sort of bouncing off Jan. Like, I would love to have missing middle and bungalow court housing where, you know, some of the big reasons why some people want to have a house is like, oh, you want a workshop, oh, you want, you know, a garden. Well, we can share a garden. We can, you know, we can have a workshop in, you know, a 5-10 unit building, but 5-10 unit buildings don't get built by the people who are going to live in them. Usually they get built by developers who are going to use a cookie cutter mode to do what is going to make money for them. And we take those developers out of the picture. We do this ourselves with our collective, you know, city funds, our collective, we take that power back for ourselves. I really hope that we have a lot more of those, you know, interesting and integrated housing ideas, you know, whether that's new, you know, take a new block of housing and build a bungalow court, you know, whether it's close down a street and make a new Milwaukee Avenue, which, you know, I want to throw in, Steve mentioned, and Milwaukee Avenue is gorgeous, and it's more, you know, more sought after than most of the areas, and they're small houses, but they have this beautiful shared space that makes it feel like a community and feel like, you know, not so isolated. And I think the greatest weakness of our current financial system is everything is super individualized. And a construction project is a big financial project. And individuals can't, you know, I might have an idea for a Bao group and style co-housing, but I can't fund that myself. You know, I'm never going to be able to do that. But maybe we get enough other people changing their thinking on this changing how that goes. Maybe we can have a lot of those popping up around. I think it's really, you know, the fact that you're interested, we're all interested in this stuff. I see a lot of hope for the Twin Cities changing our approach.
So the one thing I'll add before Tyrone or somebody else jumps in on your great question, Stephen, is I really am inspired and appreciative of what Tyrone's bringing to the table about the public bank, because I work bottom up. I work one community, you know, at a time, and it doesn't scale because every community help, there's one right next to it that is being harmed, right? And so I think there's something about thinking at scale, organizing at scale, financing at scale, that actually allows us to do this so that everybody benefits. And so to pick up on your question, Stephen, and I appreciate you're talking about a number of technical details and layers in thinking through design. I think that if we map where there is vacant parcels of land in every city, in every county in Minnesota, and we did a democratic hack, and we asked people at the grassroots level, what do you all think is the best use of that parcel? What are all the design considerations for that parcel? What's the best way to make sure it benefits everybody, has the lowest cost, is the most sustainable, has the most ecological benefit, and has the least possible negative impact on the quality of life in the region? And people think about all of those design pedals and design it in. At small scale, people are doing this revolutionary process all over the world, but it stays at small scale. So something I'd encourage us to do at city scale is get some people who do GIS mapping to work with Tyrone and actually, you know, plot out a map of the entire city, and then get people who live within, you know, 3 blocks of each of those parcels that we want to have a democratic hack on. And we get a massive infusion. Once everybody's, you know, once we reach 80% herd immunity, we get everybody out on the streets doing this democratic hack festival, and we invite the public to redesign the city. And then we just go to the city, and the mayor and the city council and the county commission say, here's your job, mofos, to go do it. That would be exciting.
I love that. That's a really great idea. I think talking to the neighbors is, and like actually letting them be part of the design process for real from the start is underappreciated. So I'm all in for that. When I thought about this, I was thinking about maybe 5-story buildings to something much bigger. One of the things I think we lean against bigger buildings, but I'm just going to give a really short defense of larger buildings, like think 20 floors or 18 floors. That's the level you need to be able to sustain an entire first floor being a job base or commercial space. So I think there's room for that too. So like maybe around the downtowns and along the green line and the blue line, all the different transit routes that are major, having a lot of people live right there means they don't have to own a car, which is a huge expense. People just think about housing, but you're spending about $10,000 a year or more probably on your transit expenses because this whole area is built around the car. You know, to the point that we were bringing up about planning. If we can get people using transit and staying home more, being able to be close to home more, we're going to be healthier. We're save a lot more money. We're going to be a lot better off. So I think there's a place for bigger buildings too, but on a really large scale, you're going to have to do a lot of planning with your neighbors because people will be afraid of that initially. So maybe you have to do a mix of things. And I love Sam's idea.
John, I see you have to go. You want to ask your question?
Nope. I was just what I put in the chat. So
John says one quick answer to, okay, well, I'm not going to read it out then. You can read it. One thing I'll say too is I know that Stephen, you're asking about like cooperative housing, and I know there's some co-ops in downtown St. Paul, and they have like a collective mortgage, and when one person leaves, another person buys into that collective mortgage. I assume you could do the same thing with taxes and fees. You know, it's like one person leaves, the next person who comes in picks up their share of everything else. We're getting pretty close to the end here. Are there any final thoughts anyone wants to bring up? I just want to make sure that some of the folks who haven't spoken as much, Pam and Krista, you have a chance to ask any questions or make any comments if you'd like.
I guess I don't have a question, but I'm meeting with someone to talk about purchasing a house tomorrow. And it's kind of a weird time because the housing market is wild. And now the rental market is even crazier too. So I'm kind of just stuck. I feel like cooperative living makes sense. But obviously there's a lot of structure that would have to be built into a program like that. It's not something you could just do tomorrow, but it's just a strange time. I'm not sure which direction to go, but renting isn't great either. So this has been a really good conversation, but it's ironic that I'm doing that tomorrow. So anyway, thank you.
I think we could start working to break out of that binary. It's like we're stuck in one or the other. And it's also jogging my memory. I remember that a few years ago, someone asked me, like, do you want to live in cooperative housing? And I was like, hell no, I work on cars. I don't want anything else to do with that. And then somebody said to me, like 2 years later, you could share the shop that you fix those cars in. And I said, oh, and that's because we're so trained to think like, why are we sharing? It has to be mine. I can't share this with you. I can only do this with myself. So I think let's try and break out of that binary. Even if we can't do it right now, we can do it, as we start talking to everyone about it. And just a personal note before we keep moving, 2.5 years ago, we started having a lot of conversations about the racial housing gap. Now I hear a lot of people talking about the racial housing gap. So it's like every time you take a concept and you start talking to other people about it, and those people start talking to other people about it, like I literally have seen in 2.5 years, a lot of people talking about the racial housing gap. And it wasn't something a bunch of people were talking about 3 years ago. So it's like these concepts can be brought out and take on power when we start talking to our neighbors and our community members about all of them.
Thanks, Ben. That's true. And while we are doing a lot of talking about it, particularly since the George Floyd uprising, there's been more people talking about racial justice than ever in my lifetime. But it's still more talk than action. And you remember right after the George Floyd uprising, abolition, everybody was talking about it. People didn't really think through what does that mean and how will we actually do that. So we denigrated or we degraded down to thinking about police reform instead. And so we're still needing to complete the Haitian Revolution, in which we abolish all forms of oppression. And we're still I almost swore, I'm glad I caught myself. We're still too meek to give ourselves as human beings what we really need from and with each other, which is truly deep democracy, where we say, let's design life in a way that everybody, everywhere is all right, all the time. We can actually do that, but we have to get out of our own way because we have been conditioned, like you're talking about, Ben, to give away all of our power and to let other people do the imagining. And the only key that's going to turn around our reality is if we reclaim our imagination and we reclaim our relationships to each other. Last thing I'll say, no, I'll stop there because you're out of time. I'll stop. So Tyrone, anything else you want to say, or David?
Finish your point, Sam. Finish your point. We can go a couple of minutes over.
So they're on the east side. I don't know if they still have their shop on the east side, but the Health and Wellness Center, the Cultural Wellness Center, had a definition of disease, which I really think is useful, and it matches what we're talking about in this conversation. Disease is caused by the loss of culture, the loss of community, and individuality. So several people have talked about how we have gone away from relationship and we have a structure which pulls us away from each other. We have to redesign the structure of our lives so that we're brought back into healthy relating with each other. That's what democracy is supposed to be about. So we don't have a democracy right now. So I think the journey towards health is, and the journey towards commonwealth is necessarily a democratic journey, which we learn how to struggle with each other, hold each other through the storm of figuring out how to deal with the agony of our differences and find the sweet spot of the fact that we all have to have air, we all have to have water, we all have to have shelter, we all have to have education, we all have to have health, we all have to have community. Those are things we can't get as individuals. We have to create and sustain those things in the collective. And we have given away all of our power to external entities and all of these hidden jurisdictions created since the 1970s, which even diminished the power of cities and counties. So we have to recognize how those things work and just say, we're not going to let those things govern our lives anymore. We're going to govern with each other. And that's the only hope I see. And there's nothing stopping us but ourselves. So let's get to work, folks.
I'm happy to end on that note. I don't have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone who spoke and who attended. And
And if I could just jump
yeah.
in,
Go ahead,
encourage
Peter.
everyone that if you have ideas for following up on this, please approach us at the library and let us help organize future conversations, or as Sam is suggesting, to get beyond conversations to projects that take action. I think that it's been really encouraging to hear the different experiences and ideas that people have brought to the table tonight, and and in some cases that you have not had conversations with each other before. Let's try to keep that going and ask us to help convene gatherings that continue this process. So thank you. And I find it very encouraging to listen to you all.